Welcome to my channel people. Author link will be on description, make sure to check it out. Bakurio's eyes widened in glee as he watched Kagaya slowly floating in the air with a bone-chilling aura coming out of her body. The small horns on the top of her head gradually grew longer and a slit slowly formed in the middle of her forehead from which, a blood-red Rinnesharingen emerged. This level of aura, she's at least on par with that woman Amatsu, and she might be even stronger. As Bakurio marveled at Kagaya's transformation, Zetsu on the other hand was shocked as he exclaimed, "Impossible, how can you make Kagaya-sama recover all of her power? What was that pill you gave her?" Black Zetsu couldn't believe what was happening in front of his eyes. "I made sure to manipulate this body to match Lady Kagaya's previous genetic structure, but that shouldn't have been enough." What Black Zetsu didn't know was that his actions were similar to creating a huge tank that was waiting to be filled, and the chakra recovery pill did just that and simply filled the tank. After some time, Kagaya's aura finally stabilized and she stared at her own hands in shock. "I actually recovered all of my powers." Bakurio thought that she was referring to how she recovered her power before getting sealed, which was her goal for many years, so he simply smiled and said, "Now you don't have to bother with the chakra you lost to the world." However, Kagaya meant more than just this. Kagaya nodded at him and clenched her hands. "With this I can fight them if they ever attack this place." Then she focused on Bakurio's eyes and didn't know what to say, so she ended up bowing slightly and thanking him from the bottom of her heart. "Thank you, you don't need to thank me, I've revived you for my own selfish reasons as well," replied Bakurio with a shrug, but Kagaya didn't see any selfishness in his empty eyes. Kagaya's outburst of enormous chakra didn't go unnoticed by everyone. She after all was a terrifying figure that could destroy the world if she so wished. Azumo, Amatsu, Seiryu, and Doji all felt the strong presence that suddenly appeared on the moon thanks to the clones they leave in the ninja world, and immediately after, they received an order from their master that asked them to gather. Of course, they didn't need to go physically. They just used a jutsu similar to the astral projection jutsu used by the Akatsuki and appeared in a completely dark room that was only lit by a few green candles. Inside the room was a huge chair that was covered in silver chains and nailed to the walls of the room, and a silhouette appeared to be sitting on it, and it didn't escape the binding of those chains. However, the light of the candles disappeared before it could illuminate the person on the chair. "I believe you all sensed that chakra just now, right?" spoke a deep voice from behind the veil of darkness, and the four of them immediately responded, "Yes, Lord." Then, an eerie silence covered the room before Seiryu spoke. "Would you like us to deal with it?" A terrifying aura gushed from all of their bodies, but their lord simply smiled, and despite them not being able to see it, the eeriness that covered the room made them realize just how much he enjoyed this development of events as he said, "No. Leave her be for now, this might end up being a good bait for the rest of the Otsutsuki. They make for a quite delicious meal compared to the ants populating this world." "As you wish, Lord," replied the four of them in unison. "However, this world might reach a state of peace if that man is left to do as he wishes, so you are allowed to open the gates of your worlds. Let the feast begin, ha 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 ha." After those words were uttered, the four of them stared at each other in shock before they grinned and returned back to their respective words. In hell, Amatsu summoned her strongest underling Uwabami and said, "Prepare to open all 7 gates of hell and prepare our armies. We shall start invading the ninja world soon." Uwabami was surprised by the sudden order, but he calmly nodded and said, "As you wish," and quickly disappeared with his slitted eyes shining ominously. "It seems like I will finally have an opportunity to kill that brat." In the beast world, Seiryu lived in a castle that was built at the top of the tallest mountain that existed in the world, a mountain that was surrounded by a huge forest that seemed to have no limits. "Kuzuryu," called out Seiryu, and right after, a terrifyingly huge dragon came flying from a distance. It was so huge that even a tailed beast or a perfect Susanoo would pale in size compared to it, but its most distinctive feature wasn't its size, rather it was its 9 heads. However, as it approached Seiryu's castle, its huge body slowly shrunk down as it transformed into a humanoid figure and landed in front of Seiryu before he asked, "You called for me?" Seiryu stared at the wild-looking man in front of him and thought he would be perfect for the job. Before he said, "I want you to prepare an army to invade the ninja world." Kuzuryu smiled widely, showing his sharp teeth, and asked, "Are you sure? I might end up killing everything. These are the orders of the master. You can do whatever you want." replied Seryu, and hearing this, Kuzuya's smile widened even further and directly disappeared. Seryu shook his head at this and simply felt sorry for what was about to befall the human world. Similar situations happened as Izumo started ordering the special ghosts under his command, while Doji ordered the demon generals that worked for him to prepare for this attack as well. The intentions of the darkness were of course to cover the world in war since it would benefit him by generating more dark energy, and if Bakurio saw the silver chains he was tied to, he would have realized his purpose for accumulating this much energy. Bakurio and everyone else were of course unaware of the weird currents that were about to hit the world like a tsunami, but the former at least had an idea that something might happen, so he was ready to use his save and load ability to fix anything that goes too far out of hand. Now however, his hands were full with another situation that he had to deal with. The energy he was feeling on the moon suddenly covered them like a barrier, and after that, a soul appeared in front of them. He was old and was wearing the Otsutsuki clan's usual outfit, and his resemblance to Kagaya was almost uncanny. Bakurio of course recognized this man. In fact, he even smiled faintly at him since he already expected his appearance here and it was part of his plan as he spoke calmly. Hagoromo Otsutsuki, I was waiting for you to appear. Hagoromo shifted his eyes from Kagaya that was clearly back at full strength to Bakurio that was smiling despite them being surrounded by the weird energy on the moon and said, "How did you know about my existence?" Bakurio shook his head. I know a few things about this world, although it seems like I don't know everything since I didn't expect that someone else can survive this long just like you. After saying this, Bakurio shot the golden barrier that was surrounding them a look, and an old silhouette that had Byakugan in his eyes suddenly appeared. Ancestor, muttered Tonari, who was silent all this time. Nothing shocked him more than seeing someone using the power of the energy vessel so freely, but now seeing the soul that appeared in front of them, he was sure that the one that appeared in front of them was none other than Hamura, the ancestor of their clan. Kagaya stared at the barrier that surrounded her with a nostalgic look in her eyes, and Bakurio could clearly feel how sad she was after realizing that her two sons were still considering her their enemy even after all this time. Meanwhile, Hamura shot Tonari a disappointed look before he manipulated all the puppets that were on the moon and had some of them carry him away while the rest surrounded Bakurio and the rest in the middle. This energy you use to control the puppets is quite interesting. What is it? Asked Bakurio curiously, but Hagoromo warily observed Kagaya and Zetsu before he spoke to him. Young man, do you know what kind of calamity you unleashed upon this world? Bakurio was disappointed seeing that they didn't answer his question, but he wasn't worried since he had plenty of time to investigate. Calamity. Old man, this world is already doomed and she's one of the few people that can help make a change. Get your facts straight before you speak. Calamity. Are you also delusional and think that teaching the people of this world how to use chakra was a mistake? Spoke Hamura coldly as he floated beside Hagoromo, and Bakurio noticed that the puppets were inching ever so slowly towards them and his intentions were pretty clear. He was planning to blow them up the moment a fight breaks out. Old man, you lived for so long, yet you are still ignorant about the truth of this world. In fact, you are even ignorant about the truth of your own mother, spoke Bakurio coldly, causing the sad look on Kagaya's eyes to flicker slightly as she stared at him for a long time. What do you mean? Asked Hagoromo, and Bakurio simply shrugged and said, I can show you if you are willing to trust me. Hagoromo and Hamura understood what Bakurio meant as they stared at his blood-red eyes and they exchanged a look between themselves. Clearly, they were communicating telepathically, and eventually, Hagoromo nodded while Hamura spoke coldly. If you try anything, you along with this moon will be obliterated. Enough, spoke Kagaya with a stern look on her face as she stepped beside Bakurio, which surprised Hamura, and he almost followed with his threat while Kagaya planned to open a portal to a different dimension, but Bakurio raised his hand and said to her with a smile, Don't worry, I will solve this mess. Kagaya's face froze slightly before she nodded with an absent-minded look on her face, and Hamura couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. If the moon explodes, the consequences on the world will be dire. Don't worry, I won't try to harm you, spoke Bakurio to Hagoromo, and the latter nodded, showing how trusting he was despite the circumstances. Then, they locked eyes, and Hagoromo's vision instantly shifted into a forest with a cloudy sky that appeared to be expecting heavy rain. This was the area near the hideout of the Akatsuki where Bakurio fought Pain in the Land of Rain. Hagoromo watched as Bakurio quickly dealt with pain that had the Rinnegan as well, which surprised him before the events sped up and he saw Bakurio talking with Black Zetsu. They talked about the origins of Kagaya and her motivations, and the more he heard, the more surprised Hagoromo got, since he didn't expect his mother to be fearing members of her clan hunting her down and what they would do to this world if they truly came. He understood how merciful his mother truly was, since she knew that without sacrifice, this world was doomed. But why didn't she tell us? Muttered Hagoromo, and a silhouette of Bakurio appeared beside him, although it didn't startle him, and Bakurio calmly spoke. Do you really think your decision to fight your mother was purely out of your choice? Do you really think it was a coincidence that the now great Toad Sage approached you back then? Hagoromo stared at Bakurio in shock, but he decided to wait for him to explain his previous question first before he asks him about how he knew so much, and seeing this, Bakurio nodded slightly and said, "This world's true ruler is hiding behind a veil of darkness and manipulating many events. Watch this." The vision in front of Hagoromo shifted again, and this time, he saw a young version of Bakurio meeting with the great Toad Sage, and the latter tried to read his future only to end up failing. Hagoromo's eyes widened in shock, since he knew pretty well how strong the great Toad Sage's prophetic abilities were. Then, one event after the other was shown to Hagoromo, from the darkness hidden deep in Kagaya's soul, to the darkness hidden in countless beings. How can such a thing exist? He wondered, deeply shocked by what he just saw. However, things were far from over, as Bakurio then showed him the reason he decided to revive Kagaya. 4 terrifying beings that were in no way inferior to Kagaya in strength. He showed him his fight with them and how they annihilated the army he gathered so easily as if they were a joke, and after everything was over, he brought him back to the real world. Although the shock he experienced was too big for him to handle, and he didn't respond to Hamura's worried calls for a while. "Brother, are you okay?" asked Hamura once more, and eventually, Hagoromo let out a long sigh and said to Bakurio, "Sorry for misjudging you. I never thought I would be this blind despite me living in this world for a long time." "Well, it's not completely your fault," spoke Bakurio calmly before he activated his Jikaninki, which startled Hamura, but Hagoromo held him back and allowed the latter to use it on them. They both felt and saw the darkness emerging from their souls, which cleared their thought process and made them feel a terrible sense of fear directed toward the being that could lay such a curse on them, and they didn't know what to say. Kagaya's eyes narrowed dangerously when she saw the same dark energy leaving her son's souls, and understood that someone had manipulated them to end up fighting each other. Meanwhile, Bakurio smiled as Hamura removed the barriers, since he realized that he was the only hope this world has, and said, "As I said before, I was already expecting Hagoromo to appear here, but seeing Hamura as well is a good surprise, although you seem to be about to disappear at any moment." Hamura nodded at Bakurio's assessment, and the latter calmly smiled at the two of them and said, "I want the two of you to help us fight those monsters. What do you think? This time, your enemy isn't your mother. In fact, you will be fighting alongside her." Hagoromo and Hamura's eyes widened in surprise, and they exchanged a look with Kagaya before they nodded and said, "We will do anything to rid this world of that cruel darkness." Hearing this, Bakurio nodded slightly and turned to Kagaya and asked, "Can you revive their bodies?" Kagaya nodded gently at him before she scanned the world and directly located some of Hamura's and Hagoromo's remains she hid in one of her dimensions during their fight. She then summoned them to her location along with 2 white Zetsu, which she then used to replicate their bodies. Bakurio watched in awe as this magical scene took place before he nodded at Hagoromo and Hamura and said, "Go ahead, enter your bodies and eat this." After he finished saying this, he watched them enter their new bodies and eat the chakra regenerating pills he gave them, and they soon started unleashing a terrifying level of chakra. Especially Hagoromo, who was once the Jinchuriki of the 10 tails. 2 of those 4 bastards I now have a way to deal with. 2 more to go, thought Bakurio with a wicked smile. His plan was slowly taking shape, although his enemies were also making their move. After Hagoromo and Hamura were also revived thanks to Kagaya using her unhuman regenerative capabilities, which were something she gained from absorbing the chakra fruit as well as the help of his chakra recovery pill. Bakurio tried his best to help her and her 2 sons reconcile their differences, but in the end, the atmosphere between them was simply too awkward to fix in one try. At least they aren't hostile to each other anymore, thought Bakurio before he shifted his focus to the energy Hamura and the puppets seemed to be able to manipulate, and he couldn't help but ask him curiously, Hamura, what's this energy I feel on the moon, and why does it resemble the Byakugan? Hamura shot his mother a calm look which she pretended not to see before he turned to Bakurio and said, just as my brother inherited the Sharingan from my mother, I on the other hand inherited the Byakugan. Bakurio nodded at this since he knew this much, but Hamura's next words shocked him slightly. What many people in the world do not know, including the Hyuga clan on Earth, is that the Byakugan, just like the Sharingan, can also evolve and become a stronger dojutsu. Seeing the shock in Bakurio's eyes, Hamura and Hagoromo were glad that this brat in front of them wasn't an all-knowing being, and he continued speaking in a relaxed manner. The Sharingan's ultimate evolution is the Rinnegan. To unlock this dojutsu, many conditions need to be met, but it mainly revolves around having the purest bloodline that Hagoromo inherited, which later split between his sons Indra and Asura. In the case of the Byakugan, however, its ultimate evolution is called the Tenseigan, and to unlock it you will need the purest bloodline that I inherited from our mother, which consists of the Hyuga clan on Earth and the Otsutsuki clan that I left on the moon. When Hamura finished saying this, he directly activated the Tenseigan he spoke about, and his normal Byakugan instantly transformed and become blue like two beautiful gems. Then, he demonstrated its ability and was instantly covered in a green chakra clock and had truth-seeking balls revolving around his body, and it reminded Bakurio of Naruto's chakra mode when he gained Hagoromo's six-path chakra. Is this the reason you were able to fight alongside Hagoromo to seal Kagaya? Asked Bakurio curiously as his hands itched for the possibility of him gaining these eyes as well and growing stronger. Hamura nodded at his question and said, yes, both Hagoromo and I master six-path chakra. Then he used his Rinnegan while I used my Tenseigan, which made us barely able to keep up with our mother. Bakurio shot Kagaya a look, and he was mainly staring at her normal Byakugan and asked, can you also use the Tenseigan? Kagaya nodded silently at his inquiry, which surprised Hagoromo and Hamura as they both asked at the same time, why didn't you use it during our fight back then? Kagaya simply shook her head at this question before she said, I couldn't. I sacrificed my ability to use the Tenseigan back then to deal with the other Otsutsuki member that came to this world with me, although I recovered it thanks to Bakurio's chakra pill. Hagoromo and Hamura shivered slightly at the thought of fighting a Kagaya that can also use the Tenseigan, and they couldn't help but shoot Bakurio a look and ask him directly, just who in the hell are you? How do you know so many things about us and the world? And how were you able to show those scenes of you fighting those monsters when clearly they didn't happen? Can you see the future? So many questions and doubts were expressed by them, and Bakurio didn't blame them for them, since his ability to experience the future and knowledge of the original story were two terrifying cheats that were incredibly hard to comprehend for those who lived in this world. So he thought about it silently before he said, I have a very strong ability that allows me to see the future, and sometimes even the past, but I can't explain to you how it works. Hearing that their guess was correct, Hamura and Hagoromo stared at Bakurio in admiration, although they still had some doubts, but they didn't want to pry too much on another person's secrets. Back to our original topic, what's that energy? Asked Bakurio, trying to get the conversation back on track, and Hamura smiled awkwardly and continued his explanation. Well, this energy you sense is actually something I prepared before I died called the energy vessel. I used my own Tenseigan as a core for a formation and made a ritual for my descendants here on the moon to sacrifice their eyes to it. This made it accumulate the unique energy that the Tenseigan could generate to the terrifying degree that you see right now after more than 1,000 years. Of course, this was in case our mother ever escaped from her seal and to give the people of this world a chance to fight her. Well, this makes sense. At least your preparations were better than Hagoromo's, who wrote a few words on a stone that Zetsu easily tinkered with and caused his descendants to fight among themselves pointlessly for centuries. Replied Bakurio with a shrug, which earned him a glare from Hagoromo, which then shifted into Zetsu, who instantly hid into Kagaya's wide sleeve. Sorry about that, apologized Kagaya in Zetsu's place, since he was simply following her orders, which left Hagoromo speechless and he didn't know what to say. So Hamura intervened and said with a sigh, unfortunately, my plan as well seems to have backfired, and I ended up having only one descendant left here on the moon, which clearly had some ill intentions toward Earth. Bakurio nodded at this and shifted his focus to the castle where Tonari was held against his will by the puppets and said, "Let's go to this energy vessel. I want to try something. This won't help you evolve your Mangekyo Sharingan into the Rinnegan, so this is going to be quite useless for you," spoke Hagoromo, trying to appear wise, but Bakurio simply smirked at him and said, "Who said I wanted to evolve my Mangekyo Sharingan?" Then to everyone's shock, the blood-red color and the three tomo on Bakurio eyes slowly faded away, but his eyes didn't turn back to the usual pitch-black color of the Uchiha clan. Instead, they became completely white and pupilless, just like the Hyuga, which left everyone speechless as Bakurio said, "I want to evolve this." The location of the energy vessel was near the castle where Tonari resided, and he was currently pacing back and forth thinking about what he just witnessed. What should I do? He wondered, but thanks to his great senses that allowed him to even observe people on Earth all the way from the moon, he felt a few terrifying presences approaching him, and among them was his ancestor, which both delighted him and scared him since he misunderstood his teachings and almost caused a catastrophe. However, against his worries, Bakurio and the rest directly ignored him and continued their way toward the location of the energy vessel, although Tonari noticed that the puppets were not holding him back from leaving anymore, so he decided to follow them and see what they wanted to do. However, once he arrived there, he simply witnessed the scene of Bakurio eyes absorbing the energy from the huge yellow eye-like energy vessel, and his Byakugan slowly transformed from their pupilless form to a blue gem-like state similar to what Hamura showed earlier, and the latter couldn't help but exclaim, "Impossible, what kind of magic is this?" He was sure that Bakurio didn't have the full bloodline needed to trigger the evolution of his Byakugan. However, what he didn't know is that Bakurio had a broken system, and everything was possible through it. So this is the Tenseigan, huh? It's a lot different than the Rinnegan. Having experienced using both legendary dojutsu, Bakurio felt that the Tenseigan was far stronger than the Rinnegan. The Rinnegan granted strong abilities, but its strongest ability was that it allowed the creation of 6 strong clones to do the user's biddings, and they can be recovered as much as the user needs through the Naraka path. And then there's Chibaku Tensei, planetary devastation, which can literally destroy the whole planet if you have the chakra for it. A good example of that is the moon, which was created from this jutsu, and if it were to land on the earth as Tonari wanted, it could end as a disaster. However, the biggest disadvantage of the Rinnegan was that it granted no increase to the user's physical attributes. The Tenseigan, however, was completely different. Instead of wide-range attacks, it granted the user the ability to use concentrated attacks that had much more penetrative power, mainly through the truth-seeking orbs it granted the user, but the Tenseigan also produced unique energy that creates a chakra clock around the user and enhances all of their physical attributes. Ellipsis. As Bakurio was experimenting with the various abilities of the Tenseigan, Tonari couldn't help but rush at him and ask, "How did you do this?" Hamura and Hagoromo were also speechless by what they just witnessed. Just the fact that he had the Byakugan and the Sharingan was already strange, but to actually awaken the Tenseigan, this was quite scary. Bakurio stared coldly at Tonari and couldn't help but wonder, does he think he's my friend now or what? Before he remembered how this idiot planned to take his eyes from him and directly smacked him on the back of the head and turned his lights off. Hagoromo and Hamura wanted to ask him about this as well, but they refrained from doing so in fear that they might end up just like Tonari. "What do you want us to do now? If the enemies are as strong as you said, they are probably already aware of my existence," spoke Kagaya suddenly, which made Hagoromo and Hamura turn their attention to the real problem at hand. Bakurio fell silent for a while before he spoke. "According to my experience, they won't sit still and watch from the sidelines, but I don't think they will attack you either. They didn't do so in the past, so why would they right now?" Hagoromo seemed to heave a sigh of relief before he asked, "What do you think they will do then? You know them the best, so we will follow whatever decision you end up making." Bakurio pondered slightly, and the image of the devils he fought suddenly flashed across his head as he spoke. "They may not attack us directly, but they can still turn this world into a living hell." As Bakurio said this, his eyes shined coldly, and so did the other three as a man appeared in the air above them. He had an incredibly tyrannical aura gushing from every pore of his body, and he approached them with a confident stride. Kagaya unleashed a terrifying aura from her body that made him wipe the smirk from his face and pause in his steps before he stared at her. Although different from what you expect of someone experiencing Kagaya's aura, this man had no fear in his eyes, he only had a terrible desire to attack her and devour her. The trio, of course, recognized his man from the memories that Bakurio showed them, and he was none other than Seryu, the leader of the beast world. "Hello there, it seems like there's more company than we initially expected," spoke Seryu calmly while shooting Hagoromo and Hamura a look. Despite his confident attitude, he was actually being careful as he thought, that woman is just as we remember her. Terrifying. And to actually have her two sons here as well, and they all seem to have recovered to their peak power. "I need to report this to the master." Bakurio noticed the weird disturbance in Seryu's emotions as he observed Kagaya and her sons, but he just made a mental note of it before he said, "What brought you here?" Seryu smirked slightly, seeing the unfazed look in Bakurio's eyes, and said, "I just came to say that soon, 4 different realms are going to get invaded by our forces, and if any one of the 4 of you steps into this war, we will strike with our full force and directly eradicate you." Bakurio's eyes narrowed at this while Hagoromo couldn't hold back his anger and yelled, "Why do you want to harm the world?" Seryu shrugged slightly and said, "I have no intention to harm the world, it's just that its citizens are destined to a life of suffering, not if we stop you," replied Hagoromo, and was about to attack Seryu, but Bakurio held him back. "What are you doing, Bakurio? We can't waste this opportunity, we need to get rid of him right now while he's alone." Hearing what Hagoromo said, Bakurio simply shook his head and said, "He's baiting you, he wants you to attack him. In fact, he's barely holding himself back from attacking us." "Oh," exclaimed Seryu, his smile turning into that of a beast as he said, "I'm surprised you can stop that man. I can smell the same thirst for blood from you." Hagoromo was about to disagree with Bakurio's decision, but then he paused when he heard what Seryu said, and he noticed that his mother was staring at Bakurio's eyes with a weird look in her eyes, and he saw it as well. A dark abyss filled with killing intent that wanted nothing more than ripping the man in front of them apart, and Bakurio was barely holding himself back from doing so as he shrugged and said, "We accept your proposal." Seryu nodded before he disappeared from their view with a disappointed look on his face. He really wanted to eat them. Ellipsis. "Bakurio, why did you accept his proposal?" asked Hamura with a frown on his face. "Because we can't fight them right now. Even if Hagoromo and Kagaya can face one of them on his own, no one can face the other two, at least not for now, not to mention their master. I need time to prepare for him," replied Bakurio with a sigh. "What should we do then? We can't sit and wait as the world falls into chaos," asked Hagoromo while clenching his hands tightly. "Of course, we won't allow for such a thing to happen. We are going to do our best to train and organize the various powers of this world and prepare them for this fight. Don't worry, there are plenty of people strong enough to take on this challenge. The situation isn't completely hopeless. Plus I have a few plans to increase our manpower." After saying this, Bakurio left Hamura on the moon since he wanted to see if he could reintegrate the power accumulated throughout the years in his old Rasengan into his new body, and took Kagaya and Hagoromo back to Earth. Although they transformed their appearance to look like normal humans. His first destination was Konoha, where he found a home for Kagaya and Hagoromo to stay in the Uchiha compound before he went to meet Minato to tell him about the bad news. "This is bad, we need to inform the other hidden villages about this before it's too late," spoke Minato with a serious look while inside he was thinking, "Is this the burden Bakurio-kun had been hiding this whole time?" Bakurio noticed Minato briefly staring out of the window with a chilly look in his eyes, but he ignored it and simply said, "They might not believe us, but we need to try." The relationship between the various hidden villages was always tense thanks to the bloody history they had, which went far beyond the 3 ninja wars. This was Bakurio's concern in trying to gain their assistance. They will most likely not trust their words and will probably think that it was just a new scheme by Konoha with ulterior motives, and the darkness will probably interfere to make sure the situation remains as it is, if not make it worse. For the next 2 days, Minato and the other high-level ninjas of Konoha kept discussing and making plans on how to deal with this situation, and during this time, Bakurio visited the Land of the Rain once more. His meeting with the rest of the Akatsuki members has arrived. Nagato and Konan were still at the village hidden in the rain to lead the village since it was now in an alliance with Konoha, and she will be the one accompanying Bakurio to the meeting since Nagato lost his puppets. Inside the Akatsuki's hideout where Bakurio previously fought Pain, there were many people gathered and he easily recognized them. However, the same wasn't true for them as a young boy with long blonde hair and slanted blue eyes asked Konan, "Oh, are we having a new member?" Konan stared at him calmly before she shook her head and said, "This is Bakurio, he's going to be the new leader of the Akatsuki, oh, not mincing her words at all huh. I like it," thought Bakurio while smirking slightly as he observed how each member of the Akatsuki reacted to this news. Some of them seemed bothered like Deidara, but most seemed unfazed like Kakuzu or Sasori who simply narrowed their eyes and observed him. Where did the old leader go? Did he die? Asked Hidan with a frown on his face before it turned into a twisted smile and said, "How lucky." Konan frowned slightly at his attitude but suddenly, Deidara moved and threw a few explosives at Bakurio, but the latter simply pushed them away with some wind chakra and locked eyes with Deidara and he found himself in a land of nightmares right after. The rest of the members turned serious as this happened, with only Orochimaru smirking widely and watching the good show. As Konan said, "I will be your leader from today onward, any objections?" Asked Bakurio coldly but no one spoke except for the crazy Hidan that said, "As long as I get to save people, I don't mind." Bakurio turned his attention to Hidan and he could feel the overwhelming amount of dark chakra coursing through his body and said, "Save people huh?" A cruel smile suddenly found its way on Bakurio's face as he instantly appeared in front of Hidan before anyone could react, and the next thing they saw was his head separating from his body and landing on his hand. You. Kakuzu's eyes widened in surprise and readied himself in a fighting position and so did the others which included Sasori and Juzo. Bakurio didn't care about their reactions at all and he simply observed Hidan coldly and said, "Don't pretend to be dead." The moment Bakurio said this, Hidan's seemingly dead eyes suddenly shot to life as his body raised a red triple-bladed scythe-looking weapon and tried to slash Bakurio with it but the latter simply held it with his hand and kicked his body away. This weapon is strange. I feel a strong desire to kill almost to an obsessive degree trying to affect my mind. This is no simple weapon, thought Bakurio before he quickly sealed the weapon inside a scroll. Ellipsis. At the same time he did this, the dark being tied to silver chains on top of his throne suddenly opened his eyes and a weird desire flashed through them as he muttered, "Finally, I found a good match." A huge earthquake shook the dimension he was in and the silver chains holding him in place almost broke apart from the sheer force he was exerting before everything calmed down once more and he muttered, "Not yet. Soon I will leave this place," and then those eerie eyes closed again putting the whole dimension into a state of eerie silence once more. Meanwhile, the head Bakurio was holding started screaming at him, "Return my scythe to me." That was a gift from Lord Jashin himself. Only his most devout followers can wield it. Bakurio smirked slightly at him and asked, "Really? Who's this Jashin you talk about?" Hidan had a hysterical look on his face as he responded, "Lord Jashin is the savior of this world. With his mercy, everyone shall die and be ridden of their fears. Ah, how I wish I could serve him more," spoke Hidan while his body tried to sneak behind Bakurio and attack him again but it simply got kicked away and Bakurio didn't waste any more time with him since he already concluded that this guy was a hopeless case so without further waiting, he suddenly locked eyes with Hidan and tried to delve into the deepest parts of his memories using his Sharingan. Hidan was originally from the village hidden in hot water, Yugakure. It's located in the land of hot water, the same land where the war that Bakurio orchestrated between Konoha and the other hidden villages took place. This village and the land as a whole were famous for their pacifism and peace-seeking attitude. However, Hidan as a member of this village was the complete opposite. In fact, he desired nothing more than killing and spreading destruction everywhere he went. According to the memories he was viewing, Bakurio found out that this was the point when he was approached by a sect that worshipped Jashin, literally means wicked heart or evil god. He found that they believed in everything he desired and instantly fell in love with this sect and became its most devout member. Then Bakurio witnessed how Hidan used his strength as a former Jonin of Yugakure to kidnap many hopeless villagers from all around the land of hot water and took them to the hidden location of the Jashin sect. Once there, they were sacrificed cruelly. And through some kind of ritual and the use of that scythe-like weapon as a catalyst. All of their suffering and hate as their life was ripped away from them transformed into negative energy which then was fed into Hidan and allowed him to reach his inhuman physical and spiritual state which made him basically immortal. These were all things Bakurio already expected, although they still deepened the frown on his face. However, something that caught his attention was a weird vision Hidan saw as his body transformed during the ritual. A dark being appeared in front of him, but before Bakurio could examine him, Hidan's head suddenly exploded, as if someone was trying to remove any evidence. This disgusting situation again. No matter how many times I turn back time, the same situation will keep happening. Just like during the time with Shino, thought Bakurio with a disgusted look on his face as blood and brain matter slipped from his hand. I will find my answer, eventually. He thought with a cold look in his eyes as some of his clones were already on their way to investigate Jashin's sect in Yugakure. No one spoke as Hidan appeared to have died a gruesome death and Bakurio calmly stared at each of them and said, I don't care what kind of forbidden skill you practice to make yourselves immortal or whatever. If you disobey my orders, death will be your end. Each member of the Akatsuki had huge egos, but at this moment when they stared at Bakurio's blood-red eyes, they could only see the reflection of their death, and the black flames that came out of his body and incinerated Hidan's corpse didn't help at all in reducing the chill they were feeling. Convincing the Akatsuki members was easy since Bakurio knew what every one of them desired the most. After showing them his cruel side, he then started negotiating with them. After all, forcing people into doing something will make them refrain from putting all of their potential into it, so he had to use both the stick and the carrot to convince them. For Kakuzu, he was a greedy person that would do anything for money, so he used money to tempt him. Sasori was a man obsessed with puppets to the point that he became one himself, and Bakurio decided to show him all kinds of being he didn't see before, such as the devils and demons, which raised his intrigue and his desire to make puppets out of all of them and maybe even integrate them into his own body. Juzo was the easiest one to convince as he left his village because of its crazy ruler, and after telling him that the situation was solved over there, he gladly agreed to work for Bakurio, although not before he confirmed what he said to be true. Nothing was needed to be said about Orochimaru since he was already working for Bakurio. As for Deidara, he struggled at first, but in the end, Bakurio was able to convince him by saying that he should work for him until he can beat him, and the latter's eyes ignited with determination as he vowed to create an explosion art that no one could resist. And Bakurio knew that he had the potential to achieve such a thing. I will contact you if I ever need you. You are dismissed for now, spoke Bakurio coldly, and the Akatsuki members instantly dispersed, with the exception of Orochimaru and Konan who stayed behind. Bakurio-kun, it has been a while since we've last met, spoke Orochimaru with a weird smile on his face, making Bakurio frown slightly. You useless white snake, I had to send more than 10 clones just to help that project advance, and you say you didn't meet me for a while. Bakurio was really annoyed by the fact that they had yet to find a way to fully integrate Hashirama's bloodline into his own, but they were making fast progress after he started assisting them with his true clones, and they will soon achieve the results they have been wanting. Orochimaru was shameless enough to not blush when getting called out like this by Bakurio, and he simply said, I didn't expect you would take over the Akatsuki. That's quite the achievement, but I wonder, what happened to the old leader? Orochimaru shot Konan a look when he said this, since among the Akatsuki, she's the most loyal member to the leader, but now she was following Bakurio and he was afraid. Afraid that Bakurio might be mind-controlling her, and if he could do it to this loyal woman, he will most likely be able to do it to him as well. That's none of your business, Orochimaru, spoke Konan coldly, making Orochimaru's eyes flicker even more, and Bakurio could clearly sense his doubts, so he simply shrugged and said, Stop worrying about useless things. A huge war will soon come knocking on our door, and I need you to hasten the process of our experimentation. I will contact you later for something else as well. After saying this, Bakurio directly disappeared from Orochimaru's sight, and Konan followed after him, leaving this wicked snake thinking, what kind of enemy can make this guy worried? With this in mind, he decided to hasten his plans as well. He had to perfect his body-switching jutsu. Ellipsis. Back at Konoha, Minato and the others finally came up with a plan on how to approach the various hidden villages, and it was through none other than Kurama and his ability to communicate with the other tailed beasts. They would first communicate with the tailed beast and its Jinchuriki and try to gain them as allies before they tried to negotiate with the hidden villages. This was the plan with the highest chance of succeeding, other than using absolute force to make them submit. Their first target was Iwa. They had 2 tailed beasts in their procession, the 4 tails with its Jinchuriki being Roshi and the 5 tails with its Jinchuriki being Han. Shikaku was the one chosen for this job, and he easily connected with Kurama before the latter found himself in a dark space with 3 beasts surrounding him. One of them was Kurama, while the other 2 were a red-furred and green-skinned monkey, with a body build of a gorilla. It has eyes with yellow irises and white pupils, spike-like protrusions along the length of its tails, elongated blunt fangs, and 2 long horns curving upwards on its forehead like a crown. This was the 4 tails Son Goku. Meanwhile, the other one primarily resembles a white horse, but with a dolphin's head. It has 2 pointed long horns and 3 shorter horns in front. The ends of its horns, hooves, and tails are tan, with some of the same colored spots before the tan areas of its horns and hooves. It also has red markings under its dark blue-green eyes. This was the 5 tails Kokuo. Shikaku noticed that the moment he appeared, the air around him appeared extremely tense as the tailed beasts eyed each other before Son Goku broke the silence. Kurama, how come you can communicate with us? Have you finally broken from your seal? It seems like the situation isn't that helpless, thought Shikaku before he cleared his throat and started speaking. Iwa wasn't the only hidden village that had more than one tailed beast. However, one of the reasons Fugaku and Minato decided to approach them first was because of Bakuryo's encounter with them that laid the foundation for them to possibly have peaceful relations in the future. As this was happening, Orochimaru finally returned back to his base, and the moment he set foot there, he was approached by none other than one of Bakuryo's clones that said, "Orochimaru, I need your help in reviving a few people." "Oh, is it in preparations for the war your real body spoke about?" replied Orochimaru doubtfully, which earned him another nod from Bakuryo before the latter spoke. "I know you already have remains of both the first and second Hokage. Help me revive them first before we try something crazier." "Something crazier?" asked Orochimaru with a doubtful look on his face, which brought a smirk to Bakuryo as he said, "Yes, reviving Madara Uchiha." Orochimaru's heart shook slightly and he couldn't help but shake his head and say, "Unfortunately, they won't have their full power. The impure world reincarnation causes the revived people to drop significantly in their power. Don't worry, I have a way to deal with this problem," replied Bakuryo. Of course, he planned to fully revive Hashirama and Tobirama, as well as Madara. Far away to the west of the land of the earth existed a place called the Land of Demons. This land was famous for its legendary shrine that was rumored to be sealing the soul of a strong demon for many generations. Many priestesses throughout the ages made it their duty to make sure that this seal remained intact. What they didn't know, however, is that this demon they were sealing was simply a disposable pawn by Doji, to keep the attention of the people away from the true danger near them. The entrance to the demon realm. This realm was full of demons, and if unleashed upon the ninja world, a huge catastrophe would unfold, but now that long-forgotten entrance started to slowly accumulate energy, a clear sign that it was soon about to open and unleash its horrors upon the world. Jinchurikis weren't as valuable in Iwa compared to other hidden villages for some reason, but even despite that, Shikaku didn't find it easy to convince Han and Roshi. This was mostly because of them being Jinchurikis, ones that could control their tailed beast as well, which meant that they had extremely strong personalities for them not to be affected by the tailed beast chakra and influenced by people easily. However, Shikaku kept at it until he eventually found a way to convince them, which resulted in him successfully setting up a meeting with the higher-ups from Iwa, which included the current Tsuchikage Onoki as well as some of the strongest ninjas from the village such as Akatsuchi as well as his granddaughter Kuretsuchi. Meanwhile, seeing that the negotiations with Iwa were going in the right direction, Konoha started thinking on how to approach the village hidden in the clouds. If not for Bakuryo preventing the Uchiha rebellion and reviving all old heroes from Konoha, the village hidden in the clouds would have probably had the strongest military power in all the hidden villages as well as economics, thanks to their strong grasp on the land of lightning and almost their complete dependency from the daimyo. Konoha, however, still rely heavily on the support of the daimyo of the Land of Fire, which was working as its biggest investor. However, after Fugaku became the Hokage, Bakurio kept instilling in him the idea that raising the economy of the village and becoming independent was necessary even more than rising its power, which the latter eventually agreed with, and he worked on it for the past few years, which made them start to catch up with Kumo, slightly to the displeasure of the daimyo of the Land of Fire. For the communication with Kumo, Konoha chose none other than Minato for the task, since he already knew both the Eight Tails Killer Bee and the current Raikage A. In fact, he fought with them back during the Third Great Ninja War and almost killed them both if not for him being touched by B's brotherly love. So, using the Kurama sealed inside of him, Minato started communicating with both the Eight Tails Gyuki and the Two Tails Matabi, and he soon found himself in front of a giant blue cat, an octopus and a fox. As this was happening, in the Land of Sound where Orochimaru's main base was hidden, two coffins suddenly sprung up from the ground containing two monsters of this world, and they happened to be brothers as well, Hashirama and Tobirama Senju. Orochimaru stared in glee at the two coffins before he turned to Bakurio and said, "Bakurio-kun, my impure reincarnation jutsu is still imperfect, so if we want to have control over them, we will need to suppress their consciousness." Bakurio calmly shook his head and said, "Don't worry about it and just go ahead with the plan." Orochimaru shot Bakurio's eyes a weird look, and he eventually decided to warn him. "You should be careful. Tobirama doesn't have the best views of the Uchiha clan. Don't worry, Orochimaru. If he does anything, we will just get rid of him." Orochimaru felt a slight chill from seeing the cold look on Bakurio's eyes. It was a look that said, "If he joins us, then all is good. If not, he will just send him back to the Pure Land and have him keep Izumo company." Orochimaru reluctantly nodded at Bakurio's decision and prepared himself for the worst before he directly activated the Edo Tensei and completed the summoning process, causing the doors of the coffins to open eerily, and the eyes of both Hashirama and Tobirama slowly opened. I didn't expect I would ever be here once more," said Hashirama with a carefree expression as he observed his surroundings, while Tobirama's eyes directly narrowed as he understood what kind of jutsu brought him back to life. It was none other than the jutsu he created, and now it's being used by an Uchiha. Or at least someone with an Uchiha, which made a cold glint flash through his eyes. "It's an honor to meet you, Lord First and Lord Second," spoke Orochimaru with the best innocent smile that a snake could have on its face. "You are?" asked Hashirama curiously, not at all minding the fact that Bakurio was an Uchiha. In fact, he was curious about him as well. "You can call me Orochimaru. I'm the student of Hiruzen Sarutobi," replied Orochimaru, which brought a wide smile to Hashirama's face as well as a nod of approval from Tobirama as he said, "It seems like Hiruzen knows how to raise his students. You can actually learn my Edo Tensei, but why did you summon us?" Orochimaru was tempted to say that it wasn't that hard, but he didn't want to antagonize them and simply said while pointing at Bakurio, "My friend here needs your assistance in something." Tobirama glared at Bakurio and spoke, "There's nothing I can do to help members of this evil-ridden clan, Tobirama." "What did I tell you about referring to the Uchiha like that?" yelled Hashirama with clear anger on his face, prompting a snort from Tobirama which made him sigh helplessly at his stubborn little brother that never changed, so he turned to Bakurio and apologized. "Sorry about that." Bakurio calmly shook his head and said, "I don't care about him. What I really want is to talk to you. Someone consumed by darkness isn't that significant to me. Who are you calling as someone consumed by darkness?" spoke Tobirama coldly, and a terrifying aura gushed from his body despite his weakened state, which made Orochimaru sweat slightly. Hashirama was about to scold Tobirama again, but before he could, Bakurio suddenly disappeared from their vision, and before they could react, he appeared above Tobirama and obliterated his body with dust release. Then, he further ignited it with blaze release, which was something he achieved after having evolved his fire release during the past 2 years. "Now that the annoying guy is gone for a while, can I ask you something?" asked Bakurio calmly while Hashirama thought in shock. "This guy is strong, and he could use Emu's dust release. What's going on? Did Iwa and Konoha form an alliance or what?" Hashirama's thoughts wandered in all kinds of directions before he let out a sigh at his own brother that couldn't regenerate and said, "Sure. Go ahead." Bakurio nodded before he asked what was always on his mind. "Madara Uchiha, as his close friend, have you ever heard of him having an ability called Jikaninki?" Hashirama's eyes widened at the mention of this, which was a huge indication to what he thought, as the latter directly replied, Yes, however, this isn't Madara's original Mangekyo Sharingan's ability. He got it after transplanting his brother's eyes into his own. Bakurio felt the clear sadness in Hashirama's heart as well as guilt, but he decided to ignore it for now as he thought, this finally confirms my guess. Madara probably was able to use Jikaninki in his right eyes just like me after he gained his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. However, the weak version of Jikaninki was barely enough to detect the dark seeds, not to mention destroy them, which is probably why he felt so hopeless about the world. Knowing that an injustice exists and not being able to do anything about it puts a lot of pressure on the person. However, he probably sacrificed this ability after using Izanagi to fake his death so he didn't notice Black Zetsu's schemes at the later stages of his life. But what about after he was revived? In a completely dark space, 3 people were currently facing each other. 2 of them were males while the last one was a female, and they were respectively, Minato standing in front of Kurama, Killer Bee standing in front of Gyuki, and Yugito Ni in front of Matabi. Killer Bee and Yugito were at first surprised by finding themselves summoned into this unique space, but that shock was soon transformed into absolute horror and shock when they noticed the huge 9-tailed fox staring at them eerily and the implication behind it being here. Did the 9 tails finally find a suitable Jinchuriki? Asked Yugito absent-mindedly as her vision slowly lowered to see who was standing in front of the 9 tails. Killer Bee did the same, and the moment they laid eyes on the familiar man in front of Kurama, their shock and horror instantly increased by 10-fold as she yelled, "Impossible, why's this man here?" Meanwhile, the face of Killer Bee who fought Minato in the past paled slightly as he said, "Oi partner, this can't be how it seems. Am I in a dream?" Yuki stared silently at Minato before it shook its head and said, "No, the man in front of us is the real deal." "Fourth Hokage," muttered Yugito while eyeing Minato warily, and the latter calmly smiled at them and said, "I know you two are surprised, but please hear me out first. I will explain to you what's going on. You expect us to believe you?" replied Yugito doubtfully, not understanding why Konoha would reveal such a strong trump card in their hands. However, Killer Bee had an idea of Minato's personality and decided it was worth at least listening to what he had to say, so he quickly replied, "Please explain, and clear this confusion off my brain." "Thanks," said Minato to him with a warm smile while thinking, "It seems like this guy didn't change much from back then." Then he started telling them about the horrible news of the incoming invasion. As this was going on, back at Orochimaru's hideout, Bakurio was still questioning Hashirama in his search for truth. "I see, so Izuna Uchiha was the previous user of Jikaninki and after that, Madara inherited it from him, huh?" muttered Bakurio, to which Hashirama replied in surprise, "Why do you have this ability?" Bakurio could see the clear intrigue in Hashirama's eyes and felt it was weird, so he asked him, "What are you happy for?" "Maybe if you work together with Madara, you can create a jutsu to cleanse this world of the darkness that plagues it," he said excitedly, which confirmed Bakurio's guess as he asked, "So you know about the dark seeds, huh?" "Yes, Madara told me about them," replied Hashirama with a sad look before it turned into a nostalgic one as he started speaking. "Back before the hidden villages were created, the Senju and the Uchiha were always bitter enemies. Later on, after Madara's little brother's death and him having gained the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, he was capable of using the ability of his eyes without worrying about the consequence of them going blind. Through this, he realized the darkness plaguing the hearts of the people that were desiring war, yet he couldn't do anything to change it. Removing those dark seeds required a huge amount of energy, and he discovered that they will just recover after some time has passed. That's when he started to give up on the hope that humanity could live a normal life. Is this why he left the village? Because he kept feeling the hostile intent of the people around him directed at him and his clan, including the one from your little brother?" asked Bakurio coldly, to which Hashirama didn't deny and nodded with an even sadder look on his face while shooting his brother that was trying to regenerate an angry look. "Yes, that's correct, I couldn't change their perception, unfortunately." Orochimaru's eyes were filled with intrigue as he listened to this conversation and the amount of secret information it contained. What's going on here? What are these dark seeds they speak of? He felt that this was the answer to many of his obsessions, so he listened even more carefully to what they were saying. "After your fight with Madara, where did you go? How come you died not long after?" asked Bakurio calmly, to which Hashirama rubbed his left chest slightly before he said, I went to the land of demons since I heard about the existence of a sealed monster that can manipulate darkness, but when I arrived there, I found that it was sealed and was at most at the mid-cage level. So, I kept searching for an answer in that land until I eventually found a hidden entrance. It led me to another dimension filled with strong demonic creatures. However, I still carved my way through them until I eventually encountered a terrifyingly strong demon that could rival me in strength. And what surprised me the most about this was that it appeared to be guarding a pitch-black temple with the words Shuden Doji written above its entrance. Listening to this point, Bakurio frowned slightly as he thought, it seems like Doji has strong followers as well. Hopefully, this is the strongest one, otherwise, this war is going to be a big problem. Meanwhile, Hashirama continued with his story. That fight was the hardest fight of my life, but eventually, I beat that demon and stepped foot into that pitch-black temple. However, that's when I met him. A man with pitch-black eyes that appeared almost like two black holes was sitting in front of an altar calmly and appeared to be praying. And the moment I laid eyes on that altar, I felt the dark seed in my heart going out of control and terrible desires started taking over me as countless whispers started echoing in my ears. And that man didn't sit still, as he started singing some sort of demonic tune and tried to turn me into a demon as well, so I directly turned tail and started running back to Konoha. However, no matter how far I ran, I kept hearing that demonic tune in my ears along with the evil whispers. And after recognizing that I will eventually lose control over my body, I decided to end my life before it would be too late. This is my story. The underground base fell silent, and only the sound of the recovering Tobarama could be heard. After some time, Bakurio, who finally got his answers, calmly said, "First Hokage, that man you met is Doji, and his strength is far beyond what you can imagine, which is why I want to revive you. Please lend me your power." Seeing the sincere look on Bakurio's face, Hashirama laughed loudly and said, "Sure. This time around I will make sure to kick that guy's ass." Bakurio smiled slightly before he initiated the revival process for the two of them while making sure to remove the effect of the darkness over them with his high Jikaninki. Ellipsis. Meanwhile, in the land of grass which separated the land of fire from the land of the earth, a meeting was currently being held between the higher-ups of Iwa and Konoha. From Iwa arrived their two Jinchuriki and various strong Jonin and heads of strong clans, and they were led by Onoki. And the same was true of Konoha's side, as they had Hiruzen and his two famous Sannin students as well as the leaders of strong clans such as the Hyuga, and they were all led by the 5th Hokage Fugaku Uchiha. The moment the higher-ups of each village sat down, Onoki went straight to the point, but he addressed Hiruzen while completely disregarding Fugaku, for he was an Uchiha. "Oi Hiruzen, do you really expect us to believe that nonsense? Don't think that just because you revealed to us the fact that you can control the 9 tails, it would mean that we should believe anything you say now." Hiruzen's eyes narrowed slightly and he couldn't help but shoot Fugaku a look, but he was relieved when he noticed that the latter's stoic face didn't seem fazed at all by the disrespect Onoki was showing. In fact, before they came here, Bakurio had already warned them about the hate Onoki held for Konoha and its Uchiha clan in particular that stemmed from the humiliation he suffered along with his teacher at the hands of Madara. However, even though Fugaku didn't seem to mind, a person behind him held a different opinion. Kuretsuchi, who was standing behind Onoki, kept staring at the man behind Fugaku that had his Sharingan at full display, and she found him familiar, but she couldn't match him with anyone she ever met. This man was of course one of Bakurio's true clones, which he sent along with this convoy to help them in their negotiations, and when he noticed that Fugaku appeared to be weighing the severity of the situation over his pride just like Hiruzen usually does, his eyes immediately narrowed. "Onoki, if you want to address someone, you are to address the Hokage. Please note that we can do with or without you. Just don't come begging us for help when your village gets annihilated," spoke Bakurio coldly, which surprised Fugaku, and he couldn't help but shoot him an enquiring look before he returned to his stoic look and readied himself to whatever Onoki might do. "Who do you think you are, Uchiha brat? To think you can talk in this meeting?" replied Onoki with an angry look on his face, and anyone perceptive enough could feel that his chakra was moving chaotically as if he was going to attack at any moment if he didn't like the answer. Bakurio, however, simply smirked and said, "You don't remember me? Well, I'm but a simple teacher from Konoha. You can call me Bakurio Uchiha." Onoki's frown deepened at first, but then a certain memory sprung to his mind as the image of the man in front of him superimposed with the image of a kid that kidnapped his granddaughter a long time ago. You. He muttered in surprise, and even more surprised than he was were Kuretsuchi and Akatsuchi, who encountered Bakurio along with Onoki, and Kuretsuchi in particular couldn't help but shoot in surprise while staring at the muscular Bakurio. You. Is it really you? Everyone in the room could clearly see the fire igniting in her eyes, and just as expected after seeing Bakurio nod at her, she immediately said, "It's time to have our rematch." Kuretsuchi, now is not the time for childish games, spoke Onoki while observing the smirking Bakurio, and the more he did, the more he couldn't help but find himself being reminded of Madara Uchiha, which greatly annoyed him. This is no childish game, we can make this a bet. If I win, I want that man to join our village. If he wins, I'm willing to convince my stubborn grandpa to form an alliance with you. What do you think, 5th Hokage? Kuretsuchi actually said this directly to Fugaku with a confident smile on her face, but the latter couldn't help but smile awkwardly at her and shake his head. What? Are you scared? She spoke again, and finally, Onoki lost it and yelled at her, "If you say one more word, I will kick you out of this room." Kuretsuchi flinched slightly, but she still shot Bakurio a look as if she won after seeing the hesitation on Fugaku's face, but the latter suddenly rubbed the back of his head as snickers started echoing from the ninjas of Konoha, including Hiashi, Itachi, and anyone who really knew Bakurio. This brought a frown to Anaki's face as he asked, "What's going on?" Fugaku shot his ninjas a look to not be disrespectful before he said seriously, "Well, we just don't want to bully your village, that's all. How about you pick another Jonin and we might accept this bet." The eyes of the ninja from Iwa narrowed when they heard this, and seeing the barely held laughter from the side of Konoha, they took it as Fugaku was retaliating against Anaki's disrespect. What they didn't know, however, is that he truly meant his words. To his knowledge, betting against Bakurio was a stupid decision. He never saw him truly lose. "Are you underestimating our ninjas?" spoke Onoki coldly before he turned to his granddaughter, which he trained rigorously for these past few years, and so she was already at elite Jonin level and almost reaching the low cage level, and he couldn't help but smirk. "Fine then, I accept this bet. Brat, you better honor the end of your deal." Bakurio pointed at himself curiously before he smiled and said, "Are you sure?" Onoki for some reason had a bad feeling when he saw the weird look on the face of everyone from Konoha's side, but he still believed in his granddaughter, so he nodded at her to signal, "Take this seriously." Kuretsuchi nodded back at him before she said to Bakurio, "Let's go out," before she disappeared and reappeared outside the huge tent they were in. Meanwhile, Bakurio unhurriedly walked out, followed by the rest of the ninjas from both sides, which made Kuretsuchi angry, but she controlled her anger. "Oh, she's not as impulsive as she used to be, not bad. It seems like she realized that I'm intentionally provoking her. I'm starting to like this little investment more and more." A small smile appeared on Bakurio's face, and only those who were present during their first encounter understood the reason behind it. "Please remember, this is just a friendly fight. Do not injure each other," spoke Hiruzen, trying to turn the fight into a friendly spar, and both Kuretsuchi and Bakurio nodded at him before they rushed at each other. "I will show you how much I progressed during these past few years," yelled Kuretsuchi, but Bakurio's blood-red eyes suddenly shined dangerously as he said, "Sorry, but you shouldn't consider me as your opponent. My eyes are set on something beyond humans." The moment she heard this, Kuretsuchi felt a chill in the deepest part of her soul and directly yelled, "Lava release, lava prison." This was an offensive jutsu usually used to trap people and melt them away. However, this time she actually used it on herself to defend against any possible attack by Bakurio. However, how could this be enough to stop a monster? Bakurio calmly stepped in front of the lava jail and used the complete mastery of the gentle fist to split it in half, making it appear like a miraculous scene. Impossible. How could he manipulate his chakra to such a fine degree? Yelled Kitsuchi, Kuratsuchi's father from the ranks of Iwa's ninja. However, the people were too shocked to answer him as they watched Bakurio then calmly approach her and deflect any attack she sent his way by just using his gentle fist, leaving many speechless until he eventually reached her and placed his hand on her neck, signifying the end of the fight. The scene fell into complete silence, but it was eventually broken. "How did you become this strong?" asked Kuratsuchi in disbelief before her eyes started to tear up as she said, "I sacrificed a lot, trained harder than anyone for more than 3 years under the guidance of Grandpa. How is it possible that I still lost after all of this effort to someone so much younger than me? How? Bakurio could see the clear disappointment and depression brewing in her eyes, so he gently flicked her forehead and said with a smile, "Don't put yourself down, you are very strong, for a human. You don't need to compare yourself with a monster." Kuritsuchi felt like she was losing herself when she stared into Bakurio's empty eyes, and it made her forget her own depression for a second as her heart started aching for a completely different reason. But then she watched as Bakurio turned around and simply said, "I trust that you will hold your end of the deal." Before he disappeared, although his words left a bitter taste in the hearts of his friends. After Bakurio's true clone left, the negotiations with Iwa advanced further. This was especially thanks to Kuritsuchi, who upheld her end of the deal and was trying to reason with her stubborn grandpa as much as she could to make him accept this alliance. Although Onoki was struggling inside, that struggle would only increase whenever he laid his eyes on a member of the Uchiha clan, including Fugaku. Meanwhile, as this was happening, Bakurio's true body summoned the clone that had the Rinnegan and made him bind Tobirama and Hashirama's remains to his Rinnegan's six-path ability. Then, he summoned the head of the King of Hell through the Naraka path ability and made it swallow those remains. Munch munch munch. Hashirama and Tobirama stared at the weird ability curiously as the head seemed to be chewing on their remains, which in no way appeared as a form of restoration. "What the hell is this thing?" asked Tobirama, interested in this weird ability as well as the unique dojutsu that the true clone had that allowed it to summon and control the weird creature in front of them. "These are Madara's eyes," replied Bakurio calmly, startling both Hashirama and Tobirama, and the latter couldn't help but yell, "Impossible! That guy would never exchange his Mangekyo Sharingan for any treasure in the world." Bakurio shook his head and said, "I never said he exchanged his eyes." "You mean?" asked Hashirama in shock, feeling like he understood something, but the conversation was abruptly interrupted when the King of Hell spat two perfect bodies. This was an idea that Bakurio came up with to revive the dead. The only downside is that the Rinnegan had a restriction of requiring a body to be bound to it to be able to manipulate the King of Hell into restoring it, otherwise, it won't work and the King of Hell would simply devour the body or the remains. "I'm sure you two can both use the spirit transformation jutsu. Go ahead, I removed my control over these bodies," said Bakurio, and right after, Hashirama and Tobirama witnessed the eyes of the bodies turning back into their normal eyes. The duo nodded before directly entering their bodies, and right after, a terrifying aura radiated from the two of them that would make most cages pale in comparison. Especially the one radiating from Hashirama that reached the high super cage level. Meanwhile, Tobirama was only at the low super cage level, but his arsenal of jutsu granted him a lot of utility that could allow him to fight even those stronger than him. "Brother, should we?" asked Tobirama while staring coldly at Bakurio, hinting at something sinister, but Hashirama simply sighed at his brother's antics before he said, "When will you learn to control that hatred of yours?" "But," replied Tobirama, but Hashirama quickly cut him off and said, "No buts, this isn't the time for infighting, there's a much troublesome enemy lurking in the shadows." Hearing this, Tobirama reluctantly nodded and remained silent, so Hashirama turned to Bakurio and spoke with an apologetic smile on his face, "Sorry about that. What do you plan to do now?" Bakurio had a stoic look from start to finish, and he kept staring at Tobirama eerily as he responded, "First, I need to remove some loose ends." "Jikaninki. You." Tobirama quickly reacted by averting his eyes, thinking that this was some kind of Sharingan genjutsu. However, he soon felt something disappearing from his heart that greatly lessened the hatred he was feeling toward the Uchiha, but that was it. His hatred wasn't born solely from the darkness, it was born from the many loved ones he lost to the Uchiha during the wars between their clans, including many of his brothers. So how could he forget all of that? Even if the darkness is gone and that hatred wouldn't increase in the future, it was still big enough for him to rage at the thought of someone messing with his emotions. "What did you do to me?" asked Tobirama with a cold look on his face. Clearly, he finally found a reason to attack Bakurio, and he wasn't going to miss it. "Nothing. Just removed an annoying pest," replied Bakurio nonchalantly as his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan was still on full display, and Hashirama, who also felt the darkness disappear from his heart, quickly stepped between the two of them and said, "Stop, Tobirama, I can explain." "I don't need an explanation," said Tobirama. Then, he directly rushed past Hashirama and muttered, "Water style, water-severing wave." Just as he finished saying this, he launched an enormous wave of highly compressed water in the shape of a slash at Bakurio. Clearly he wasn't messing around. Bakurio's true clone that had the Rinnegan calmly stepped in front of the real body and used the ability of the Preta path that grants the user the ability to absorb chakra in any form. And he directly absorbed Tobirama's attack, which shocked him, but he didn't stop as he kept rushing at Bakurio despite his brother's pleas to stop him. "It's unfortunate that I don't have my special kunai to use the Flying Thunder God Jutsu. And those eyes are really annoying. They can actually absorb my chakra," thought Tobirama. Then he created many shadow clones and surrounded Bakurio, planning to attack him from different directions to make it harder for his true clone to defend all of them. But that's when Bakurio calmly spoke. "I don't know what kind of grudge you hold against the Uchiha, but I won't be having an unstable factor like you near our ranks." The moment those words were uttered, the air turned chillier and both Tobirama and Hashirama could smell a familiar scent. It was the scent of death. A weird dark aura appeared behind Bakurio and eventually formed into a giant humanoid figure. It was pitch black and its body was covered in a robe that hid all of its features except for its eerily shining eyes. In its hands, it held a long black scythe, and the two brothers immediately understood that the aura of death was coming from it. Tobirama felt his heart shivering slightly, and his fears soon came true as the Susanoo held the scythe horizontally and Bakurio said apathetically, "Die." Right after those words echoed, time seemed to stop as the Susanoo slashed its scythe, creating a circular slash that extended in all directions. It was made of a dark energy. Death. Tobirama's clones tried to defend using water style, but it wasn't enough and the nearest clone was directly chopped in half and was corroded before it could even dissipate, so Tobirama decided to use all of his clones to defend his real body by creating multiple giant water wall. And it was barely enough to stop the slash. This was the strength of the evolved Susanoo, even in its smaller form. It was still terrifying enough to deal with someone like Tobirama. And seeing two more slashes flying at his real body made his heart sink. "I knew it, this guy is too much of a threat." So, this time he went all out and created a giant dragon made of water that offset Bakurio's attack again, but he was starting to despair as more slashes simply came his way and he soon won't be able to deflect them anymore while Bakurio didn't seem to be exerting any effort. "If only I had my kunais," thought Tobirama again, seeing the slashes about to land on his body since he wasn't able to block all of them, but a man suddenly stepped in front of him and created many domes of wood to block the slashes. "Brother," muttered Tobirama, and Hashirama replied with a disappointed look on his face, "I will stop being your brother if you keep acting like this." Tobirama felt the world pause slightly when he heard this, and soon after the sounds of attacks stopped as well. Hashirama removed his defenses, all for Tobirama to find the countless chopped domes of wood, showing just how terrifying the man in front of them was. After all, those domes can even withstand a tailed beast bomb from Kurama. Hashirama was about to speak, but Bakurio quickly cut to the chase and said, "I will leave him to you, hopefully. This won't be needed again in the future." Hashirama nodded seriously at this while Bakurio calmly said, "Now then, time to revive the other troublesome guy." Meanwhile, Tobirama clenched his hand tightly at the helplessness he just felt. But Bakurio wasn't worried anymore about him. For he replaced the dark seed in his heart with one of his own just to make sure. Thank you for listening, guys. See you in the next part.